Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of Pioneer Mindset. So I'm going to be asking you a question. Should you pursue your passion? So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are, and we're going to be diving into this. And so you've always heard kind of this phrase, do what you love and you'll never work a day in life. Or if you're able to do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And so I was actually chatting with a friend a while back, and we kind of made the comment about being careful when turning your passion into your profession. In this instance, he's a guy that likes to kind of do some tinkering or wrenching on some older tractors, like 40-20, 40-10, 30-10, those different styles of tractors, and just, tearing them apart, rebuilding them, overhauling them, different things like that, which I think is great. He kind of made a reference to somebody else, kind of a mutual friend that we have, a mechanic in the truck shop and stuff like that. And he said, we actually just need to be careful about turning that passion into a profession, because there's a lot of things that can actually be a negative when that happens. And so, kind of keeping that question in the back of your mind, should you pursue your passion? Okay, so going to be diving into that here. But this actually, as I was talking with him, kind of brought up this conversation, this topic. It made me think back to a podcast episode that I listened to a while back. It was from Alex Hermosi. He's got a podcast called The Game. This particular episode was episode 978. 978. Awesome that he's got so many episodes out there. But really good, valuable episodes that he puts out, a lot of good different content. And so with that, he was kind of talking about the same things. And so he was saying, your passions and your interests are often incredibly narrow. Okay. And so meaning with that is it just feel like, sometimes they don't always align. So, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. He was kind of saying that same phrase seems very simplistic, but also kind of really inaccurate. Okay. We kind of keep that almost that mantra in the back of our head. And that this idea that I just want to do what I love. And if I'm able to do that, it's almost as if I'm not working, right? When we're almost blessed because we won't have all these challenges. Okay, that's where we need to pause, right? Is when we think that we're not necessarily going to have challenges when we do what we love, because we're just going to enjoy it, right? And the passion's just going to carry us through. So we just feel like this is really inaccurate. And I wanted to kind of speak to this in my own life kind of history. And so kind of taking a step back. So when I grew up, I really enjoyed showing cattle, really enjoyed being around the cattle side of things. I would definitely say I had a passion for it. I showed in 4-H and FFA, and, I was definitely one that I would put the hard work in. I would get up early, go out to the show barn before school. I'd gather the calves, rinse them off, blow them dry, tie them down for the day, do all that before school. Getting up at 5:30 was not a problem for me because I enjoyed it so much. And so I'd say I took that same passion. And then when I actually went into diesel technology for a little bit of background, I went to school for that because I thought that was a good way to get me back to the farm, right? Back to as kind of a way to provide income back to the farm. So that's kind of the route that I went. And with that, and I wasn't necessarily probably the best just because I wasn't a natural mechanic. So I didn't always enjoy it as much. So I didn't maybe pursue that area of interest because I didn't enjoy it. I wasn't necessarily passionate about it, okay? I just saw it as a way, as an opportunity to provide value, monetary value, money back to the operation. And looking back, maybe I should have pursued that. Okay, maybe I should have actually stuck with that more. Maybe I could have been a really good mechanic there if I'd tried harder, learned more, and I could have been a really good way to provide a living back to our family. So there's one kind of example there, but I'm going to keep moving on the cattle side of things because that was how we kind of expanded in our own operation because I was passionate about the cows. I enjoyed working with cows and calves and all that kind of entails with that, right? And so, back in 2016, you guys kind of all probably know the story if you've heard it before. We expanded. We went from 150 cows up to 300 cows, built the hoop building, and we went through that whole process. But in that, we faced challenges. Okay. We face challenges, from the financial side of things, from even a death loss side. With this hoop building that we built, we went into this thinking that, hey, this is going to take care of a lot of our struggles and challenges. Well, really, it just kind of created different ones, new ones that we had to tackle, that we had to try to, figure out, right? And so, kind of with that being said, we were faced with adversity, faced with challenges. And so all of a sudden, this passion that I had tended to kind of almost fade out a little bit. And so I feel like that's so very common is we take this passion and okay, I'm going to turn this into a profession. I want to do this every day of my life. If I work hard or if I do what I love, I'll never work a day in my life. Right. And so that's what we did. But what happens when that passion gets hard, when things get hard, when you're faced with challenges, faced with adversity? Well, I feel like we start to lose that passion to some extent. We start to lose that or we get misguided by that, or that kind of fades out to some extent. And we're all of a sudden we're just facing at the hardships, facing at the hard times, right? And so, I'm going to be referencing this episode with Alex quite a bit here, but one thing that he kind of mentioned was every goal worth pursuing has so much pain between where you are now and where you want to go. Okay, there's so much pain in between that. And I feel like we kind of get naive in anything that we're doing, especially young, especially when you're a young buck trying to kind of go after this. You know that there's going to be challenges, right? But it'll be fine. It won't be that bad. We honestly think to ourselves, and I know I did too, is yeah, it'll be hard, but my passion or my love will carry me through. How many times have you thought about that in whatever you're passionate about? Maybe it's the cow calf side of things, maybe it's feeder cattle, maybe it's the feedlot, maybe it's the agronomy side, maybe it's the row crops, maybe it's cover crops. I'm really passionate about the soil health and cover crops and all that stuff. But anything that we're doing, there's going to be adversity. There's going to be challenging times. But we just think in our head and we get to the point where we're almost just a little bit naive and we think, well, it'll be fine. It'll carry us through. And I'd say those that are maybe more experienced, that have been through the challenges, that have had to face adversity, that have maybe gone down that path of chasing and pursuing their passion, maybe can probably step back and acknowledge that that's going to happen. But I think typically when we're younger, we don't necessarily have all that life experience. We're pretty naive. We're pretty naive. At least I know I am, because we just kind of get this in our head. Well, it'll be fine. My passion will carry me through. Well, then what? Will it actually carry you through? Or what actually happens? What happens when you start feeling that pain? What happens when you start being faced with hardships and adversity, with challenges, with the uncomfortable situations, and you're all of a sudden you're doing all these things that you don't want to do, all the hard, challenging times. All right. So going back to the hoop building, we literally thought prior to the hoop building, we were calving in, I think, February or March timeframe. And so February, March, Northeast Nebraska can actually be kind of challenging, even though it's maybe a tick warmer February, March, but you can be faced with a lot of mud. With where we were calving at in a dry lot situation, we were faced with a lot of disease issues, a lot of actually coxy issues within the calves, scours issues. We'd lost a lot of calves. And so, and that was before I came back to the farm. And so my dad at the time, calving 150, 160 cows out, mostly by himself, and a little bit of help here and there. But he's like, we got to do something different. And that's where we started looking at, okay, let's expand, let's put up this hoop building. Let's try this, put them under the roof, take out some of the elements and try to take out some of the wind, calve at a different time of year if we need to, and just try to explore this different route. But then what happened? Well, we were still faced with a lot of health issues, very naive in that we thought by putting them under a roof, it would solve all of our problems, because it did not. It did not. We were faced with a lot of health issues. I think that first year we calved under, it was a learning experience, obviously, but we still had a pretty high death loss. And then I even fast forward a couple of years in 2018, well, I think it would have been 2019, when we had bought some bred heifers. We had expanded that third time. We went from 150 to 300, and then all of a sudden we went up to 450. And how we did that is we bought a group of bred heifers, an entire group. I think there was 100 and almost 160 of them. Okay. And we were calving them in 2019, starting in January and early February. And we had a lot of bad weather, even though the hoop building, was supposed to kind of take away some of these elements. We still had a lot of cold weather dealing with bred heifers. We had a lot of challenges. We had death loss, struggles after struggle after struggle. And, even past that, still trying to do the best we can to take care of the calves, to do your best there. Also, okay, so now all of a sudden we have this passion. We're still passionate, still loving the work that we do, but we're faced with adversity. We're faced with the challenge. We're faced with pain that's come from this, okay? Pain from not only the financial side, and feeling like we're going backwards, feeling like, this was almost, I don't want to say mistake, but this has set us into such a deep hole. How are we going to dig ourselves out? So that financial pain was definitely there and weighing on us. But then just doing our best to keep calves alive. I mean, when you are a cow calf guy, if you're a steward of the land or the livestock and you are doing your absolute best and you're seeing calves die right in front of you, right in your hands while you're trying to IV them or you're doing something like that, that's hard. That is hard for sure. And there's no denying that. And so all of a sudden, that I feel like your passion starts to take all these blows, takes all these hits. You get beat up, and you're just trying to figure out, okay, is this worth keep going? And I feel like we've all been there. You know, if you're in farming, if you're in ranching, you probably are fairly passionate about what you do. But as you face adversity each and every day, as you get beat up, as you get punched, get knocked down, get kicked, get bruised, get bloody and beaten up, you just kind of at some point maybe come up with this thought in your head of like, is this worth to keep going? So just thinking about this, and as we kind of talk about this, kind of keep moving here, what happens when we feel the pain? Well, we typically kind of start looking for something better, maybe even looking to quit. Like I just mentioned before, is this worth it? Just not, maybe all of a sudden we get this thought in our head, well, I'm just not passionate about it anymore. Okay. So another kind of taking a step back on the cow calf side of things, just kind of being that young, eager, naive guy that's willing to work, willing to put in the hours, but didn't necessarily think about all the challenges that would be faced and even the mental load that would come with that as well, right? And so I remember having a conversation with my uncle at the time as we were, kind of expanding at some point or another. And he's like, do you ever think you're going to get burned out? And I'm like, no. Like I said, being naive, being young, not knowing any better, not having those experiences, I was truly just running off of, like I said, passion and pure work ethic that if we work hard, we'll be fine. Right. And so with that kind of that comment of, do you think you'll ever get burned out? And I'm like, no, I'll be fine. And I tell you what, I did get burned out. I did get burned out because of the hardships though. It wasn't necessarily because of the work that we were doing. It wasn't necessarily because I didn't enjoy it anymore. It's just because the hardships and the pain blindsided me to where my passion actually was. Right. And so I just got to the point where I wasn't necessarily passionate about it anymore, or all that passion was kind of buried down because of all the hardships that we had to face. And so with that, it gets to the point where we maybe find that we are resenting everything that we're doing. There were definitely times where we resented the hoop building, the challenges that it took us through, the uncomfortable conversations with the bank, with family, trying to navigate the uncertainty moving forward, what that was going to look like. And so all that, it kind of causes us to resent a lot of those things, right? And so I guess, most people stop because of the perceived failure in their mind. This is kind of take me to my next point there. And this is coming back to the podcast here with Alex Ramosi. Most people stop because of that perceived failure in their mind. Okay. And I'd say that's where we were at. That's where we were at. So going back to, maybe resenting the cows a little bit, resenting the hoop building, not being truly 100% passionate anymore about what we were doing, I'd say that's ultimately what led us partially to actually exit the cows. All right. So as we kind of take a step back and look at the decision that we made about 3 years ago, it was in 2024, 2023. Man, I'm losing track of my years here now. But, when we decided to kind of get out of the cows, I focused on the numbers a lot there, because I had to take ownership of that. And having to look at the numbers and seeing how negative they were at the time was also kind of added to all this situation, right? But as I dove into that, trying to get creative, not willing to quit, not willing to just give up, trying to make sure that we protect everything we've built, so I can still be passionate about maybe other areas of the farm, farming in general, right? Doing what we love and enjoy. But so with that, trying to do the numbers and seeing the numbers that I saw, it just kind of came up with the conclusion that, hey, maybe we were better off not owning cows at the time, right? If we liquidate these cows, what can we do with that money? Put it towards some debt. We can still maybe custom feed. We still have other options. We still have all the infrastructure and the resources, just kind of shifting gears a little bit. But I would say a good portion of that was the numbers, but the other portion of that was just the fact that I didn't want to do it anymore, that I was just less passionate about it, as I was just trying to find a way out of it. Now, I will say that, even though we fought a lot of things that were out of our control, a lot of the health issues, all that other stuff, I do feel like I was actually pretty good at it. I feel like I put a lot of thought into it and I was very mindful about it. When it came to treating calves all the time, I was pretty good about spotting sick calves. I was pretty good about, doing all sorts of work with the cows and calves. I could AI, I could, do a little bit of preg checking. I could doctor calves, cows, all that other fun stuff. I could post calves. I could do all that stuff. So I was very skilled and I was pretty good at it, right? But at the end of the day, I just kind of lost that passion because of the hardships. Okay. And so that kind of goes back to this comment there is, most people stop because of their perceived failure in their mind, or they just don't want to do it anymore because of the hardships. Okay. And so back to the failure side of things, on this episode with Alex Ramosi, he was actually quoting Jocko Willink, which is another really good guy out there. Highly recommend looking him up if you haven't. But he basically quoted him with this quote here saying, all failure besides death is psychological, meaning that basically everything that we perceive as failure is just in our mind. It's just in our mind, as if we are creating this own notion that we've failed. And really, what it comes down to is you have not failed until you cannot physically do something anymore. And so, with this, I wasn't necessarily pinning myself as a failure, but there again, at times I probably was, just because of everything that the hole that we dug ourselves into, the challenges we're going to face moving forward, regardless of whatever we decided to do, whether keep the cows or not. And so, I just probably painted myself in my head to some extent that I had failed, right? And I feel like we do this all the time. And when we face the hardships that we do, if we succumb to those hardships, we paint us as failures or just kind of paint that thought in our head, right? And so just kind of acknowledging that all failure besides death is really just psychological. So we need to make sure that we kind of readjust our kind of mindset on failure. And so going back to the passion side of things, really what this kind of comes down to and what Alex was trying to get to within this episode here is your passion alone likely will not get you very far. All right. Your passion alone likely will not get you very far. And furthermore, I feel like, as I've taken a step back and kind of thinking about things, it's very rare that the things that you're incredibly good at is also the thing that you really enjoy. And furthermore, in other words, we could also kind of view this as your passion likely does not equal the thing that's the most profitable. Okay, so this one here I want to hit on. It's not likely that your passion will equal the thing that's most profitable. Hello, this is agriculture, folks. Okay, this is farming, this is ranching. The odds are we did not get into this lifestyle. We did not get into agriculture, farming, ranching, being stewards of the land and livestock because it was the most profitable. We all know that because there's so many other things out there, so many different other ways to make a living. It'd be so much easier to make a living. With that side comment, my dad always had told a story of years and years ago when we had an old vet here locally, and we were preg checking cows, and our setup at the time was not great. It was alleyway outside, wooden sides, dirt floor, basically. It slants downhill a little bit, so if it gets muddy, it's just a disaster almost, with a head catch at the bottom. And this vet was basically preg checking cows, and you have to basically jump in and out of this alleyway the whole time. And it was muddy. It was not fun. And he always tells a story that this vet was like, there's got to be a better way to make a living than this. And yes, there is so much better ways to make a living, make money, provide for your family, be profitable. There's so many better ways to actually make money out there than agriculture and farming and ranching. But it all kind of comes back to our passion, right? And so I feel like we get caught up in that all the time, that we're just trying to do what we're passionate about. We're just trying to do the things that we know. And yeah, we can be really good at it too, by the way. But usually the things that we're really good at and that we really enjoy are not likely the things that are actually the most profitable or the most lucrative or going to be the ones that actually bring the most money back to your operation. Okay, it's just not likely. All right, and you can think about that for your own operation. Maybe you've hit the golden egg out there, so to speak, to where you found that one thing that you are super good at, you're super passionate about, and it's super lucrative and bringing money back to your operation. But it is very rare. All right. And so we get caught up in this trap thinking that if we just pursue our passion alone, that will carry us through. And because it's our passion, we'll be good at it and we'll be able to be profitable. Well, I just feel like that's kind of that false sense of reality and kind of inaccurate, kind of like what Alex was saying. If you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Well, usually what happens is we're faced with these hardships, and then all of a sudden the thing that we love turns into work, and the thing that we love now turns into work, and now we actually kind of resent that. And now it's no longer a passion. Now that changes. Okay. So that's where I'm going back to. Your passion alone likely will not get you very far. Okay. So the comment that he made kind of on this same token here is your proficiencies will take you much further than your passions. Okay. Your proficiencies will take you much further than your passions. So now what does that mean? Well, it just goes back to that comment that I just made. All right. So looking back, okay, what are the things that you're actually really good at that you maybe don't always acknowledge? because you're so blindsided by just pursuing your passion constantly. Okay. Just because that you're always looking to what can I do that I'm going to truly just enjoy, back to, you know, doing what you love, and you'll never work a day in your life. Well, we just need to kind of take a step back, and sometimes your proficiencies will actually take you a lot further than your passions. So let's take a step back and acknowledge, okay, maybe we need to have like just a balance here. And this is where I'm kind of going with this, is trying to find this balance at the end of the day, because I'm not telling you that we should quit farming, or we should quit doing this thing that we're passionate about because it's not profitable, because I'm in the same boat you are, by the way, right? I'm just like you in that I'm passionate about farming, passionate about being a steward of the land and the livestock. I'm just like you. But how do we make sure that if we pursue our passion, that we can also make sure that we're being mindful of our proficiencies as well? Okay, let's not just throw those under the bus. And usually there are a lot of things that we are good at within our passions, but sometimes those two just don't always align. And sometimes, going back to like I said before, it's very rare that those things will actually align with what's most profitable. Okay, what's most lucrative, what's going to bring the most back to your operation. Now, how do we find balance in this as well? Okay, how can we balance this out? And really, what can you do about this as well? You know, it's about balance, but also things that you can do. What some takeaways that you can kind of leave with this episode and really think about. All right. So he also kind of mentioned within this podcast episode, by the way, go check it out. Really good one. He does a lot better job kind of delivering this from a high level overview, thinking about, you know, this whole concept here. But he also mentioned that it's okay to make money doing one thing and being passionate about another. And this really is where it kind of hits home, because I feel like we have it stuck in our heads that the one thing that we do to make money has to be the thing that we're passionate about. And I don't know if that's necessarily something that's always been true. I don't know if that's something that's here changed here lately with society, you know, just really kind of taking a step back and not wanting to be uncomfortable, you know, not wanting to be miserable, stuck in a job and that makes good money, but you know, we want to do what we love. So we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to pursue our passions, even if it means less money, even if it means dealing with these other hardships, right? And so that's where I just feel like we need to kind of take that step back and acknowledge that it's okay to make money doing one thing and be passionate about another. And that goes back to that other comment about your proficiencies will take you much further than your passions. So it's okay to have proficiencies in one area and be passionate about something else in another area. And that's going to go kind of to my next point here, is how can we maybe protect your passion to some extent? Okay, protect that passion so that way your passion does not become work, and your work does not become something that you regret or you resent, because that ultimately happens all too often. So I'd say when it comes to protecting your passion, you know, one thing that a guy could potentially do there is just have a hobby. Now, whether the hobby be even farming or the passion itself or caring for the livestock, or maybe it's just some other hobby. And so with this being said, I look at a lot of the operations out there. Maybe it's a guy that works in town. He's got a really good town job that provides a really good salary for his family, right? Provides for his family with that. Okay. And then he's got maybe the farm on the side. Maybe he's got cow herd on the side. Something else on the side. That's his hobby. Now I feel like we got a pretty good negative connotation around like hobby farms sometimes. And by all means, you got to be careful so that way they're not sucking equity, sucking money, or you're not subsidizing them from your basically your day job, right? But you got to look at those guys that maybe have their town job or their off farm job or their thing that they're proficient in that's providing the income for their family, that's really taking care of them. And then they've got their farm on the side that, you know, might also be, I guess the words I want to use for is also still doing just fine. You know, it's not necessarily an equity drain or sucking back out. But those guys, you got to look at them and they probably just really love what they do. Really love farming, probably even almost more than say the full-time farmers, because it is to some extent a hobby, because it's an escape, it's because it's something that they get to do, right? They see this as a blessing, they see this as an opportunity, they see this as they've been given this chance to farm on the side. Yes, it might be stressful. Yes, it might be late nights and long weekends. And even from a financial standpoint, they might even be further ahead because they have their day job to provide for the family. Okay. So, you know, you kind of look at those to some extent, you might look down at them because, you know, they got to go to town, they got to work in town, they can't do this full time, but they might actually be happier in what they're doing and they might actually be more enjoyment in that as well. Okay. So let's just kind of take a step back and acknowledge how can we protect your passion. And sometimes we can do that by having a hobby, whether it be the farm or just some other hobby, some other way to kind of separate ourselves from the thing that we are basically using as our proficiencies, right? The thing that we are using to provide for our family, the thing that's going to bring up hardships wherever we're at within the business, right? So next one here, another something else that we can do is set boundaries. It kind of goes hand in hand with kind of the hobby side of things, but setting boundaries. Don't let your passion or your profession control every area of our life. I'm pretty guilty of this one as well, folks. I am not always the best at setting boundaries. When I'm awake, I'm probably thinking about farm or the business or how can I serve my clients. And whenever I'm awake, I'm probably thinking about those things, whether I'm in the car with the kids or if I'm just thinking about that stuff all the time, nonstop, because I don't really have necessarily set boundaries. Okay. I always admire those folks that basically can walk in the door and they can shed everything that's on their shoulders off and be present with the family. And that's really kind of what this is about, is setting those boundaries. So, okay, this from this time, this is what I'm thinking about work. I'm not letting it control these other areas. I'm not letting those hardships from the work, from the thing that it's providing for my family, bring that home to them. Okay. So that's where I think it's really important to be able to set those boundaries so that passion or even that profession that you have doesn't control every area of your life, because that's when it changes, right? That's when it changes, when all that control kind of starts to shift. All right. And another thing here is I think diversifying your identity. I thought this was kind of a really unique concept here around diversifying your identity, because how often do we get wrapped up into one identity? Just one. I, Garrett Ruskamp, am a farmer. That's it. Nothing else behind that. All right. We get wrapped up into one identity. And when that identity faces hardships, when that identity faces challengings, when that identity gets questioned, that's when things get really tough. We get wrapped up into just one thing. We all know that, diversifying an income stream, that's a benefit. That's a positive, right? So what about diversifying your identity? What about being able to be, the farmer, the family man, the businessman? What about being able to be good at this thing or that thing or the other thing, a community member, a Christian? What about just diversifying your identity? I thought that was actually a really powerful one as I was kind of thinking about this, because we just get so wrapped up into one thing. And when that one thing gets questioned, by golly, that's when it feels like the world is falling down. And so then, and it kind of goes back to the hobby side of things too. We can diversify our identity because we've got other hobbies, or if we're setting boundaries, we are diversifying our identity by doing that as well. Okay. And then, okay, the next one here is going to be just even acknowledging the season that you're in and the bigger picture. And so, what I mean by that is back to the balance side of things, kind of taking a step back and, okay, so maybe the season that I'm in is I'm just trying to provide for my family. Maybe I've got some kids at home and young kids, and so we're kind of to the stage where it honestly takes a lot to kind of fund a family lifestyle these days, especially now these days with inflation, everything else that we're dealing with, whether it be the price of daycare, whether it be the price of just groceries, right? It takes a lot to provide for our family. So maybe just taking a step back and acknowledging that it's okay that maybe I need to have an off-farm job. All right, it's okay that I'm doing what I can to kind of pursue my purpose, but I guess if my purpose in life is to provide for my family, that's okay. All right. So kind of taking that step back, acknowledging what season that you're in and looking at the bigger picture. Looking at the bigger picture, maybe saying, okay, this job doesn't 100% serve me. It's not 100% my passion. I'm not truly, I don't enjoy it 100%, but it provides a good lifestyle for my family. And I'm not 100% miserable. I can see the things that's possible by me going to work, by me getting this paycheck, by me providing for my family, and then just kind of being able to kind of take a step back and look at that. Now, we don't want to be, and this goes back to the balance side of things too. We don't want to be 100% miserable if you just absolutely hate your job. And you're probably going to be, if you absolutely hate your job, you're 100% miserable with what you're doing, you're probably going to be carrying that home. You're probably going to be carrying that on your shoulders as you walk through the door, and it's going to be a hard time shedding that. And being stuck at a job that you're absolutely miserable in can definitely take years off of you as well. So that's where I'm saying there has to be this balance here. This has to be some sort of alignment with whatever season that you're currently in. And so just kind of being able to acknowledge that, look at this from a high level overview as to, where are we at today? What's going to serve us today? That doesn't mean it can't change in the future. That doesn't mean at some point we can't try to pursue your passion, right? Also kind of same thing with the balance side of things in the season that we're in is acknowledging the proficiencies that I actually have. What am I actually good at that could actually, bring the most income back to our operation. I'm not saying I didn't ask what your passion was. I'm asking what are you good at that you could use that as the skills that you have, hone those in, and then use that to bring that money back to your operation. And then there too kind of goes back to keeping that passion on the side. All right. So then the last one here, as we kind of get to moving on, is reframing the mindset around this whole thing. This is why we call it pioneer mindset, folks, right? We got to reframe our mindset with what we're talking about here. And the quote that I'm going to use here is the journey is less difficult when we find meaning in the struggles. All right, I'm going to repeat that one more time. The journey is less difficult when we find meaning in the struggles. So if we can reframe our mindset that, there's a reason that we're going through the challenges that we are. If we're in the business side of things and, we're faced with challenges and we're thinking about quitting, or our identity is questioned, or we're not passionate anymore, using that quote unquote passionate about this thing anymore, we got to realize that maybe there's a meaning in all these struggles and all these hardships that we're faced with. Maybe there's a better version of myself that's going to come out on the other side, that's going to be able to take on more hardships that are going to come, by the way, that are going to come. Let's try not to be as naive as that we maybe once were in thinking that there's not going to be any hardships at all. So realizing that, hey, there's a lot of meaning in whatever we're going through in each season as well. And really, it kind of comes back to finding a way to work through the suck, the struggles, the shit fest. Excuse my language, but finding a way to work through that, because there's going to be different versions of that in everything that we do. In that day job where you're getting a W-2, there's going to be things that suck with that. Or working on the farm or ranch where you're just kind of your own boss. You have the freedom, but there's going to be things that suck with that too. All right. So, how can we work through that? How can we find a way to work through that and reframe our mindset? Pioneer a new mindset for yourself so that way we can find meaning in these struggles. Sometimes the way that we do that is actually being able to withstand the frustration tolerance. All right. That frustration tolerance is something that Alex mentioned as well. And those that are willing to withstand that frustration tolerance are the ones that are going to win, the ones that are going to have a victory, so to speak. All right. So basically, the ability to withstand the suck as long as you can, or basically withstand that suck, kind of outlast others within that as well. Okay. And so with that, got frustration tolerance. What can we do to minimize it? What can we do to work through those challenges so that we don't succumb to those challenges? So that way we don't get to the point where our identity is questioned. So that way we don't get to the point where we are thinking about quitting or looking at doing something different, right? So sometimes the way that we actually get through that is maybe by finding the right tools, the knowledge, assistance, and advice. And by the way, folks, that's part of what we do here at Pioneer Farmer. Part of what we do with our clients is helping them work through those challenges, not take the challenges away. I always kind of tell folks, we can't plant that money tree in the backyard, just take all your challenges away. It doesn't work like that. I wish it did. I'd have a forest full back in the back 40, right? But, the big thing that we're trying to do there is work through those challenges, help you minimize maybe the pain that comes from those, and just work through it. So that way you can outlast others, right? You can withstand that frustration tolerance longer than anybody else. And we do that partially by having the right tools, making sure that we know our numbers, making sure that we have the assistance to make the right advice or the right decisions, and making the best decisions possible. So being able to withstand that suck and kind of work through that. As we get to rounding this out here, a little bit of a longer episode, and I apologize for that, but I'm getting kind of passionate about talking about passion, right? And so that's where I really wanted to kind of bring this to light, because there's a lot of things that we can kind of get confused here, and I feel like we get misled as well. All right, so last quote here from Alex's episode, and then I'll wrap it up with a couple final quotes. So really what happens here is Alex was kind of saying that a lot of times your interests get you started, your proficiencies keep you going, but the pain tolerance helps you finish. All right. So the other thing here, when it comes to everything that we're talking about, we are truly blessed to live a life where we get to do a lot of the things that we are passionate about. As farmers, as ranchers, being stewards of the land and the livestock, and having that passion, having that lifestyle, doing our best to provide a living for our family. We are truly blessed to be able to do that. A lot of times our interest will get us started in that, our interest in the farming, ranching, ag, whatever it is, that gets us started. Now our proficiencies, our skills, everything that we're good at will really keep you going. But the ability to win, the ability to not quit is just within yourself, within your head, what's between your ears there. Your ability to withstand the pain tolerance is going to help you finish and to find success. So loving what you do is definitely a gift. Don't let the business side of all these struggles you face every day steal that from you. And I do mean you. Don't let that happen to you. You have the power, you have the control to change things. And by the way, this is all about protecting your passion so that way we can also pass that passion down to the next generation. All right, so what are you going to do about this? Is the passion worth pursuing? That's in your hands, not mine. So I hope you guys found value in today's episode. If you want to talk more about this, you want to work through the challenges that you're currently facing in your operation, look us up at pioneerfarmer.org, and then we can definitely help you out with that and be happy to have that conversation or talk about the passions that you're in right now, but you're not sure how to work through these struggles or the challenges that you're facing. So I hope you found value in today's episode, and we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram @GarrettRuskamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.